we had about 2 weeks lead time to engage with all the stakeholders. The draft document was really a summation of the issues that they themselves had raised, as well as suggestions that they made. However, as you know, writing a document involves stylistics and issues as well as editing issues. So some of the parties at the end said, well, in principle, we are comfortable with this document. However, we need to go through it properly to be able to commit to it. And we then said, well, we need very tight timelines to go over that. And they said they would be ready by the 26th of this month. And that is why we all agreed, all stakeholders agreed.
And that includes AMCU as well?
That includes AMCU,
okay,
yes.
So everybody is on board here?
Everybody's on board.
But let me ask you this, because there was reaction from particularly investors, even outside the country. People wanted to know, what exactly will this pact do in order to restore stability in the mining sector?
Well, for starters, it would eliminate the frequent occurrences of acts of intimidation and violence and unprotected strikes. In other words, disruptions to the productive arrangements. So that's what it will do. But of course, we also emphasize that the irritants, all the issues that trigger off such disruptions, have to be addressed by all parties. So that's what it would do. So that, there should be certainty that there are issues for collective bargaining which are handled during that season or for collective bargaining. Outside of that season, those issues should be off the table, as it were. So there's a clear understanding that in the short term, there are those kinds of problems and irritants that would have to be addressed with immediate effect. And then, of course, there are the other social determinants of the irritants, which may require a bit of time. That relates, among other issues, to the migrant labor system, for instance, the fact that, these workers are recruited in the labor forwarding areas, separated from their families, and therefore have the responsibility of sending remittances back home. And those of them that are young, and they stay in the mines.
Let's talk about the short-term irritants then. One of them, turf wars. What are the suggestions? Because we all know that there are issues of turf wars between AMCU and NUM.
Yeah, well, that's a matter that's actually regulated in law, because the law stipulates at what threshold is a union declared a majority union and what rights then are attached to such status. And, the threshold for other unions to have organizational rights, in other words, the right to have a presence on the mine and to hold your own meetings and all of that is all attached to thresholds. So any other union which meets those thresholds is allowed to be in that space, and there shouldn't be any turf war which goes beyond the bounds of competition.
But what has been the problem then, Deputy President? If it is out there clear, law says this is who becomes majority after attaining this kind of membership, what has been the problem? Why have people not complied with the law?
Well, as I understand it, AMCU is a new arrival in the platinum sector. All along there's been NUM, and the workers themselves left NUM, were disaffected and left NUM, not to join AMCU, but they formed what they call workers' committees. And of course, AMCU then became their home later. And that is why in the early days of these upheavals there, it couldn't have been correct to attach blame to AMCU, because at that point, they weren't really the union. These workers had organized themselves into workers' committees outside of the NUM.
But much later on, AMCU became a majority union at Lonmin and at Impala. But they allege that instead of being recognized outright, there's been issues going to the CCMA, going to the Labour Court, but still they are not being recognized.
I'm aware that, they've been meeting on a regular basis, because I've had to be in touch with all these stakeholders. I'm aware that they've been meeting and that they've found a meeting point, which is the reason why the notice for going into strike has not been issued.
And I mentioned a little earlier on about the reaction from elsewhere. I got a note from Nomura from London, and they were saying to me, but what will change? Because we've seen these kind of pacts before. We saw one immediately after Marikana. There was another one earlier on this year, around February. But again, the instability continued. What is different this time?
Well, we have all agreed that, this is not an event. It's not a once-off thing. We're going to, as I said, there are short-term, mid-term, and long-term issues to deal with. So we're going to stay in our posts to ensure that implementation is followed to the letter.
Another issue that AMCU in particular has raised is whether or not the ministers involved, including Minister Susan Shabangu, Minister Mildred Oliphant, are not partisan, because they are alleging that these are ministers who are part of the ANC and therefore they see them as partisan against them.
Well, that's the very first thing they raised with me when I met them. And I said to them, look, I will go back to my colleagues and, sensitize them to the fact that as ministers, they are ministers for all South African citizens. And so they shouldn't be partisan when they are on public platforms. And that's exactly what I did. And that is why, if you recall, Xolani, when the president was asked that very specific question, the president emphatically stated that as government, we are neutral in these matters. And AMCU has accepted the bona fides. Last week, Fridays, we were meeting in Pretoria. They were seated next to, Mr. Matunjo was seated next to Minister Shabangu, and the bona fides were accepted here.
Another issue that has come through is that in all this, we are not hearing enough about the role of the employers. It's as though the employers are far removed from this. Why is that, Deputy President? And what is their role in ensuring that this unrest is put to an end?
No, in fact, if you had a sight of the draft document, you would have noticed that all stakeholders, have to commit to their own contributions, the roles they have to play. One of the criticisms leveled against employers was that, they ended up negotiating with the workers' committees, which is a structure that is not recognized in law and therefore went against their own regulations, as it were. So the commitment from their side is indeed they will have to conduct their relationships and business within the stipulated regulations and agreements.
Because the source of this, from those who are analyzing it, they say the employers, under pressure, of course, decided to work outside the established legal framework, and by so doing ended up paying for anarchy.
Once you establish house rules, you've got to live by those house rules. If you leave the house and operate outside of the house and under new rules, you actually invite anarchy. That is why we believe now everybody is inside the house and that the house rules will apply to every stakeholder.
And there's also an issue about government itself, that government has not been decisive in this matter. People have been saying that there needs to be leadership and decisive leadership in as far as government is concerned. Firstly, what do you make of that criticism?
Well, it depends on what precisely people are, referring to when they say there's need for leadership. There's broader leadership that government has to play. And then in the specific mining sector, there's also leadership that government has to provide with regards to both the peculiar and the general issues affecting the industry.
But interestingly, though, Deputy President, it appears as if the draft framework actually recognizes that criticism, because if you look at what government has committed itself to doing, 4.3.1, it says government commits to act decisively in order to enforce the rule of law, maintain peace during strikes and other protests relating to labor disputes, also ensure protection of life. Now, I'm wondering whether that actually is an acknowledgement that government has not done what it was supposed to do in this regard.
The issue of ensuring that life and property is protected is, of course, the responsibility of the state. So the criminal justice system is actually meant to attend to that issue. And that is why all stakeholders have to commit, because the unions and management have to commit that they will not allow, weapons to be brandished within the precinct of the mine and outside of the work milieu. Government has the responsibility to ensure that people are not exposed to acts of, violence and all of that.
But has there been any movement in that regard then? Because again,
yes,
there are still
indeed.
gatherings. There are still gatherings, and there are strikes. Well, I mean, at least I know that AMCU is sitting with maybe 2 strike certificates at the moment. How have you made sure that in the event that those strikes go through, that weapons are not brought?
Well, AMCU is part of these deliberations, as I said, and even with regards to the strike notices, certainly I know that in their dispute with Lonmin, they had discussions over, a series of meetings. And at the last check, where I was assured that they, have found a meeting point, and therefore there would not be any strike action triggered off by the issues that were or demands from AMCU's side.
All right. So in other words, they assured you that there will not be any strike soon.
Yes.
A lot of SMSs coming through here for the Deputy President, and I'm going to read some of them in a minute. But again, most of them here, Deputy President, most of them are talking about the political school and so on. Clearly, as people are talking about my professional future, people want to know about yours as well in as far as the political school is concerned.
I work with the NEC subcommittee on political education, and we're busy preparing the modules because we need to ensure that they are standardized, and we would like to test them so that they can also be accredited by institutions of learning.
But what will it mean when you finally take over this task of political educating members of the ANC? Will it mean that you will do it together with being the Deputy President?
My term as Deputy President comes to an end once this administration term ends. And so I would then be in a position to devote better time of my time towards this effort of the political school year.
That means then that you will not be, even if you were to be offered the position of Deputy President, you won't take it?
Well, one can do so much with one's time, but I think I would like to devote more time to the political education work here.
And not government?
As I said, I think my time can be put to better use in running the political education school. I think I've made my contribution.
Do you even like being in government, Mr. Deputy President?
One can't take a back seat and say, this is what we want, and so on. And when an opportunity is presented for one to make a contribution, then you pull back. I've never believed in being an armchair philosopher as it is. I've always believed that we're still faced with the struggle of, changing the conditions of our people for the better. And so in this current struggle for social justice and economic justice, we also have to, each one of us have to ask ourselves, the question of what contribution we are making wherever we are, because we can't, in the political administration front, there are only so much that can be done by those who are in the public space. But a lot more can be done even outside of government here.
In fact, after the Mangaung conference, there were rumors just all over the place that you may not even finish the term. Are you going to finish the term?
Of course, yes. Of course, yes.
But did it ever cross your mind?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Let me ask you about the government and the term itself. One of the things, and you mentioned it at that Wits Business School presentation, is that this government had prioritized issues of unemployment, poverty, and inequality as the triple challenge that needs to be attended to urgently. If you were to make an assessment, and I know what people have said, I know what listeners have said in making their own assessment of how government has fared in relation to these priorities, but what is your assessment?
One of your colleagues in the media, John Steinbeck, wrote an article about 3-4 weeks ago in which he was, indicating that this administration has done very well in 3 areas. And he says, for instance, if you take the issue of HIV and AIDS, this administration has handled that matter in a manner which makes it the best in the world, and that has been recognized even by the UN Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, that was the epicenter of the scourge of HIV has been turned around into the world's best program and that UNAIDS takes inspiration from the manner in which South Africa approaches this.
Certainly, and I know that you'll be going to the conference in Durban immediately after this interview. And well done to yourselves, because you're leading SANAC as well and have done a remarkable work in as far as this is concerned. But still, Deputy President, serious concerns about issues of unemployment, issues of poverty, inequality, where as far as the Gini coefficient is concerned, we are among the countries that is the highest levels of the inequality. Unemployment, especially young people, we've been talking about it. It is just endemic. It is chronic. How did you change the situation?
Every problem also is an opportunity, and to the extent that we have, backlog in infrastructure, that problem is an opportunity for us to employ these young unemployed people, and that is why the PICC, Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Commission, focuses its efforts on infrastructure development and the kind of infrastructure which is catalytic, that has the potential of unleashing job as well as giving fillip to the economy itself. The second area is, we have a long coastline, and so there's an opportunity there for us to create new jobs in the marine industry.
One of the biggest, I suppose, criticisms has really been around education, and it's seen as a failure, Deputy President. It's seen as not living up to the promise that was made in the manifesto in 2009.
Well, education, where we've succeeded is to expand access, Roland. Mm-hmm. So at grade level, enrollment is at 96%. It's almost 100%. The problem is that of those, only 22% go through to tertiary, past grade 12. And so clearly that is a clear message that our basic education is not working as it ought to. And so,
but sorry to interrupt you, because it's obvious why some may argue. There's a problem now with equal education, because they're wanting to know the norms and standards, and they're saying, government, do your bit, make it clear what are the norms, what are the standards, and let the kids go to school. Let families then do the rest. And government has not come to the party in as far as that is concerned.
Yeah, no, that's a fair criticism, I think, leveled against government in that regard. But the point I was making is that we've got to try and ensure that, we improve on basic education. And I still believe that we need to invest more resources in the teacher training colleges.